And next at 4, Rick will take the stage with configurations that are all the rage. A powerful model, security's embrace. Join him as he quickens the pace. And with that, let's invite our second speaker to the stage. We have Rick van den Bosch. Come on, I've been in the Netherlands so long, I should be able to say that. I apologize.
And it's the name is way too hard. Just Rick is fine. Hi, Stace. How are
I
you?
just
Hello.
realized Bosch might be from the Netherlands.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Indeed.
And actually, the funny thing is, there's this city, 's-Hertogenbosch, or Den Bosch for short. And then my last name is from Den Bosch. And then actually, I was born in Den Bosch, so I am Rick
Oh,
van
wow.
den Bosch. So
It's nicely accurate then as well.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You don't work there.
I don't live there. I live close. I don't live there.
And I'm really happy to have Rick here. He has been as enthusiastic about static web apps as I have since their inception, and had a wonderful experience a couple of years ago when we were at Techorama and we both did different sessions. You were there with Oscar.
True.
And sitting in each other's sessions and being able to help each other with questions that we didn't know when on stage. So asking the other people we knew who were also really into them. Wonderful experience. I'm so pleased to have Rick today. Those of you who saw the schedule earlier, we were going to have Purnima giving this talk. Unfortunately, she is also ill, so can't make it. So beterschap, Purnima, get well soon. We hope that you're doing well. And thank you, Rick, for stepping in. It's wonderful. We just had a comment in the private chat. It's like, yeah, somebody asked me to do this 4 days ago. So yeah, Rick has stepped in really last minute here. I'm so pleased he's been able to do that. And we have absolutely Boscher Boller for the win.
But then the only one are from Jan de Groot, and that's the only real Bossenbol. So yeah, a Bossenboller for the win. But then let's do Jan de Groot Bossenboller. I had a job there for a while, a consultancy job, and I used to come in by train, and I had to pass part of the city, and I actually passed Jan de Groot, so the bakery that actually makes the Bossenboller. In the morning at 7:15, people would be queuing up at the bakery store to get their daily shot of Bossenboller. So yeah.
Now, I'm going to have to remember that. Next time we go to Den Bosch, I'm going to be asking you again for who it is.
Oh, for sure. I will send you the the address. No problem.
Yeah. And Rick is going to be talking to us today about configuration of static web apps, because they are awesome out of the box, but they can do so much more, and you can set up the resources really as you want them to be used. So with that, Rick has his screen shared. Let's see if StreamYard lets us add it. And without further ado, me and Eric will step out so that Rick's not hidden behind Dark Meow. And take it away, Rick.
Thanks so much, Stace. Well, hi and welcome. Thanks for joining the conference today. Like Stacy said, I'm here to do a session on Azure Static Web Apps and configuration. We'll jump through a lot of the different types of things that we have available there. I have some slides, I have some demos, and I hope everything will work out great in the end. So, first of all, my name is, like we said, Rick van den Bosch. You can find me online, I think almost everywhere. I'm Rick VD Bosch, so you should be able to find me if you Bing or Google or DuckDuckGo that. Or you can find me at my local website, rickvandenbosch.net, or email me directly at Microsoft. I'm a cloud solution architect, which means I help companies make the best out of their Azure investments. But prior to working at Microsoft, I was in a consulting firm for more than 10 years as a principal cloud architect. I have my own podcast, and together with Oscar, that Stacey also mentioned. And I've always been very passionate about Azure Static Web Apps, because since its initial introduction, I really saw the value of this service, right? And then the thing is, just before Build It was a couple of years ago, the first version of Static Web Apps was introduced. And then it was only JavaScript. So they initially launched it with JavaScript support only. Also for the functions, it was JavaScript only. And then later on, I think it was like a couple of weeks before Ignite, a lot of additional features were added. So in that case, it started supporting .NET functions as well. And then later on, Blazor WebAssembly, for instance, was added into the mix. And over the last couple of months, or maybe a year or so, we've seen gradual increases in functions and features and all of the stuff that's available for Azure Static Web Apps now. That now really makes it a first-class citizen within Azure. Still, they're adding new features and functions. So for instance, as far as the hosting plan goes, there's now a new type of hosting plan in preview, which we will probably look at a little bit when we click through the portal later on. But for now, let's focus on configuration, right? Because that's what this session is for today. And all of those other services will be handled in the different talks throughout the rest of the day. Now, looking at today's agenda, I would like to do a short introduction, talk to you about build configuration and anything that has something to do with that. A look at application configuration, what can we do to actually configure the application to be behaving differently, for instance. We will look at some app settings. We'll shortly touch on the security model because I'm not entirely sure if we'll make it in time. And then I'll share the resources with you in the end, so no need to take screenshots during the talk. At the end, there will be this one QR code or this one link that if you use that one, you will go through a website that has all of the links with the different types of documentation that you need to get all of this information from there. But first of all, let's do that short introduction, right? And then, like Anjuli already said, Static Web Apps is really targeted at developing serverless web apps fast with global reach and global scale. So it's really targeted at front-end developers or maybe even full-stack developers, and initially, like I said earlier, initially those being JavaScript developers. It's really targeted at doing everything as a developer. And the funny thing is, some of the features that are supported by Azure Static Web Apps are supported through code earlier and sometimes way earlier than supported through, for instance, the Azure portal. So that kind of shows that it's really targeted at developers and developers that do the entire stack and to tie into that developer workflow. So they automatically build and deploy your web app from a repository. We'll look at that. It has, like I just said, it's really tailored to a developer's daily workflow. It does separate both static assets and from a traditional web server, and it's served from points geographically distributed around the world. And what this actually means is it's close to your end user, so it's fast. They actually also added a new preview feature recently that I'm going to highlight around that, which I think is very interesting as well to see. So we've seen this, so let's not dive into this too long because we're really here for the configuration part. We've seen that it supports a lot of functions, front ends, and then next to that lot of front ends it also supports different types of using Azure functions. Now, we're talking about the free tier today, which means we get managed functions, which also means the only functions you can run in your managed function app behind a Azure Static Web App are HTTP triggered functions. So timer triggered functions, service bus, any other types of triggers are not supported on the Azure functions that run behind a static web app if you have the managed functions available. If you need something else or need something extra, there's a couple of ways to do so. One would be create a new Azure Functions resource and host your different types of requests there, so your different types of triggers. The other way would be to upgrade to standard. And then when you're in standard, you can also bring your own function app and say, hey, I would like to have that functions be my own function app. And then I add some different types of triggers in there as well. But we also implement the API based on how it runs inside of the managed function environment. But now this time we are managing that function environment instead of the Azure cloud. So it does have integrated security and seamless routing. Again, I will show you that later on in in the demos. But just to make sure, HTTP triggers only when running managed functions, which is the default and the only option if you have free. They run on a consumption plan. They have integrated security, and they do have routing integration. We've touched upon this. So let's dive right into build configuration real quick, right? Because again, the configuration part of Azure Static Web Apps, that's why we're here. Now, if we look at build configuration, we're actually tearing apart the build pipeline that Anjuli already showed us earlier. So there's a couple of things that we need to add in there. And one of those things is the app location, which is actually the folder or the location. So the location of the folder where your application is actually residing inside of your repo. So this might be .NET WebAssembly, Blazor WebAssembly, sorry, or it might be an Angular application, but this is the location where your application is actually located. Now, if you have APIs as a backend, you're going to specify the API location, but you don't need to if you don't want to run any dynamic functions in the backend. You can use static web apps purely for static resources and be done with it. That's not a problem. If you want it, you add in the API location. Now, what your app does normally is it has a build step, and then it has an output folder where it actually puts the build. So you specify that in the output location. And like that has already been discussed, one of the things that's really cool about static web apps is it finds a lot of the information for you. So if you pick a preview of, hey, I'm doing Blazor WebAssembly and I have some functions, it's going to say, oh, Blazor WebAssembly, probably your output's under bin root, right? So that's where your location is. So it's going to pre-fill that for you. If it's not correct in the portal while creating that static web app, just change it around. It'll automatically move into that pipeline. Then it also finds out what type of application you've been building. So either based on the preset you select or the Oryx builder that runs, it's going to determine what it needs to do. So for a .NET WebAssembly application, it would be .NET build. For Angular, it will be probably ng build. And that's your app build command. That's the command that actually builds the application and puts the output in that output location to make sure that we can upload that. So there's also the possibility of explicitly putting an API build command in, and then maybe you would like to skip building the app altogether if that's in a different step somewhere. You could configure that. There's also CWD, which is Azure DevOps only, which is actually there to set the working directory explicitly. And last but not least, you can put in a build timeout in minutes, which defaults, if I'm not mistaken, to 15 minutes, but that actually just breaks off the GitHub action workflow or the Azure DevOps pipeline if it overruns its desired maximum amount of minutes. So that being said, let's have a look at what that actually looks like when we do something with a static web app in the Azure portal, right? So let me cancel out this one real quick. I'll open up the Azure portal and just to check to see if it's visible. Yeah, looks kind of okay. The thing is, we want to create a resource, and the resource type that we want to create, of course, is a static web app. Oh, there we go. And if we pick a Azure Static Web App, which is right here, we'll create it. I'll take the Azure Static Web App demo. Like it being said, we can put anything in here. So let's do awesome demo, dude. And then we pick the plan type free. And then here we see that first change that we had, or the first extra feature that was added that I talked about earlier. It's the dedicated plan. This actually means you get a dedicated plan for your static web app in a specific region. It also adheres to data residency, so that's an option. But for now, let's go for free, and then we'll be on global. And then leaving this to GitHub, let's see if we can pick my own organization. We'll pick a repository, and then let me see real quick. I'll leave it on the main branch for now. And what you see is without me specifying anything up front, it's already going to say, hey, I have detected that there's Angular in that repository. So probably you have an Angular front end, right? Again, you can add this to all of the different types of, or you can select any of these different types of supported frameworks. Another option would be to actually go custom and put in your own build commands for the app in the API. But for now, we don't have to because I have created an Angular website as a demo, even though I'm a .NET developer. And it has the ASWA demo frontend as the application, demo backend as the API location, and then it has an output location of dist/ASWA demo frontend. Now, one of the things that actually stood out to me last time is the fact that if I now go, let's see if my mouse wants to help me. There we go. I'll slide you over. So we were on my Xcode, and I think it's under GitHub, and then myself, and there we go. We have a front end, and then we have, we have the dist folder, and in the dist folder we have this. So this, it takes this as a location by default, but as you can see, the version of Angular that I'm using and the setup that I'm using is actually putting the actual files inside of the browser folder, while the preset automatically takes it out of the dist ASWA demo frontend. Now, I'm going to leave that for now because I want to show you what happens if you do. And then next up, we'll go to deployment configuration. Well, in this case, we're taking the deployment token that we have available. And then here we can actually see where our Azure functions and staging details will be stored. This right there is a very interesting thing. It now allows you to select distributed functions, which means you get backend functions closest to your end users so that responses are better. Because you can imagine if you have an Azure Static Web App and the static contents are scattered around the world, but your API, your function app hosting your API is only configured to run in West Europe, for instance, because that's where you created the resource, then requests coming in from either Asia or America or anywhere other around the world will have that extra added latency of having to go all the way to Western Europe to get to the Azure functions and get the answer back. So now it also has the preview option of doing distributed functions, which means your functions are being run closest to where your users are actually at. So that's really a nice second addition to what we already knew about Azure Static Web Apps. So I'm skipping tags, and then normally this would create out fine. It would allow me to create an Azure Static Web App. Of course, I've done so already. So if we go home, and if we go ASWA day demo, then this is a static web app, and this is actually the static web app that we created a little bit earlier for the demo purposes of today. Now, there's a lot of interesting stuff here, but the most important interesting thing is that this actually is connected to the same GitHub repo that we just saw. And again, all of those links that you will get at the end of the session, the code is in there as well, together with some pull requests to give you a couple of hints on how certain things work. And then let's first go into that repo. So we'll do rig vd Bosch. That needs to be slash, and then ASWA, I think dash demo. There we go. So this is actually the application. So we have a front end. Here it is. We have a back end. It's right there. So we have some Angular stuff that's showing some nice images. This is actually the application. And there we have it. Hello, Azure Static Web App Day. What we've created is we have a home, we have get data, and we have about. And let's dive right in a little bit into what that looks like in the front end. So for those of you unfamiliar, this is a Angular application hosted in or opened in this case, Visual Studio Code. So if we look at this, we have an index, which is just the default HTML that we need to host the application. We see the app root there. In app root, the app component is hosted, and here you can already see hello Azure Static Web App Day, which means this will be shown on each and every page, right? Then we have a couple of pills that do navigation to home, get data, and about, and we have some social links that actually point towards my personal socials. We have some other components as well. So we have an about component for the about page, and all of the routing is working. So just to show you, let's do an ng serve on this. This was not planned for the demo, so that's always good to try and get the demo gods off of their feet. Make sure that they're focusing on this one, and then I'll swoop in and do a different demo, and they'll probably don't know what hit them. So this is the application running locally, and as you can see, I can go to about, I can go to get data, which will now fail because the function app isn't running. I can go home, I can go to any of these places and have a look at what my application is doing. Now, I didn't configure anything yet for the static web app except for the build part. And the reason I actually wanted to show you what happened with the build output was the fact that when I first created this, it actually created it the same as it did right now. And then it gave me an error message saying, hey, I can't find any output of your front end, because if we go to this first one right there, it's going to say the following. Oh, that's not the message I wanted to show. Where we have the build, then it says failed to find a default file in the app artifacts folder. So it's expecting something like index or .html. And when I looked locally what happened when I did an ng build, I saw that we had that extra browser folder. So the cool thing with static web apps, I'm probably going to be saying that a lot of times, but the cool thing with static web apps is the fact that I can just go into that workflow file. I can click that edit button right there if I were the owner, because this is my different account. So I'm going to be able to show that over here. So going into workflows, I can go into that file right there. I would be able to click the edit file button, and then I can change, of course, whatever I want to. And as you can see, I added the /browser there on the output location, just to make sure that it picks up on the right location where my application or the output of my web app is hosted. So it takes this in and now deployed it to Azure Static Web App. Going back to the actual application, which was running in the other browser window. There we go. This is how it is currently hosted in Azure Static Web Apps without any configuration from my end. And that's not too necessary. We actually wanted to focus on this, Proud Pebble. This is my Azure Static Apps.net domain. Now you saw me clicking around locally and going through those different pages, right? Well, the thing is, if I try that now, I get a 404. I can go back to that application, click the About page, the same thing, I get a 404, but locally this works. Now, the reason for this happening is the fact that Azure Static Web Apps is really expecting files that it can host for you. So it's expecting an index.html, or it's expecting an about.html or whatever. But since this is a static or a single page application front end, and in this case, Angular, the application itself is organizing a lot of the routing for you. You just need to open up index.html, and then in that index.html, it does routing. But Static Web Apps thinks, hey, I need to go to /about or to /get-data, but those files are not there. So the way we can actually fix this, let me go to my other screen again to be able to pull this up. The way we can fix this is we can add some configuration. And this is actually configuration that the application has. Now, in Azure, we're usually used to opening up the Azure portal and doing stuff there while we're only developing, right? Because anything else will do infrastructure as code, like we're using ARM templates or Bicep or Terraform. But then as this is a service that's really targeted at developers and to tie into the developer experience, they have now created defined a file that does this for you. So I'm going to go into my config 001 branch real quick. And then if I go front end, it'll show me under source this file right here, which is now blurred because I have the great cloud cloak on, but it's apparently now blocking some stuff that I don't necessarily want it to block. So let me disable all of the cloaks right now. This has a static web app.config.json file, and that's the file that actually allows me to do a lot of the things that determine how my application responds. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm adding a navigation fallback. And a navigation fallback means if you can't find the file, go here. So as soon as we incorporate this, Azure Static Web Apps will be configured to say, hey, if somebody wants to go to something, something, something /about, you're going to just redirect into index.html, and index.html will figure out what to do. So this actually means that now my Angular routing works. So if we now go back into the application, and we'll take, let me get that real quick, and I will explain what's happening here in just a second. But if I now go to, I need to do environments instead of this one. And then if I now go to this button right here, yes, I know I'm leaving the Azure portal. This is the same application, and it looks like the same URL, but there's one little difference, right? So if you look at the URL on the top right, and let me move this out of the way real quick, just to be able to open up a tool that helps me show you even better. So I've clicked it almost in the right position. There we go. So if we now go and zoom in, it's still proud pebble something something, and it's still .5.azureStaticApps.net. But that one right there, that's the pull request number of the pull request that I created to add this configuration. So looking at, there we go. Looking at the pull request that we have right here, this pull request configuration 001 was created. It adds a couple of files. So it has added the static web app.config.json file that we just saw, which has the navigation fallback, and I changed something in the get data function. This pull request now has its own environment in which it has completely hosted that application, the result of that pull request. So looking at this with the -1, which means the first pull request, it now has the navigation fallback, which means I can now click get data. It's my, okay, let me explain this. I have a couple of profiles, and I have this profile set up a little bit differently than the other profiles, which means it's going to break on the get data. This one will actually work. So if I do get data, it's now talking to my API backend and getting the information in from the awesome Static Web Apps day today. So we have the sponsors right here. We have the organization right there. I can go to the About page. This is how we can actually get our application to work the way we want it to work, right? We've now configured it to have that navigation fallback. And then for the next change, one of the things I would be doing normally is the configuration isn't complete yet, as the static web app is at this point. So I clicked the wrong, there we go. So if we go into those files changed and we look at that static web app, what happens now is it will now rewrite everything into index.html if it can't find it. So one of the things that is being advised you do is to make sure that you also exclude things like images and CSS files in JavaScript, so that if those aren't filed, you actually do get a not found, because you actually want to know that that happens, and you don't want it to redirect to an HTML file when you actually want to pull in a JPEG or PNG and break it that way. So that's actually one of the things that that's recommended to do there. So we've looked at the build configuration. We've looked at what such a build configuration could look like, but also what it can mean for your application, right? So that build configuration helps you determine how the application comes about. But we've also looked a little bit into application configuration already, where we have staticwebapp.config.json that does a lot of other things for you. Now, it's recommended to be under the app location folder, so in the root of your folder. It can actually be anywhere, so any subfolder will do, but it is recommended to keep it in the root. And in case you have a build that actually processes everything that you have in place to put the information in a distributed folder somewhere where you can distribute, then please make sure that you also copy the staticwebapp.config.json file into that root location, because that's where it needs to get its configuration from. Now, staticwebapp.config.json has a lot of functionality, and we'll go over that right now. So one of the things that you can do with staticwebapp.config.json is configure the routing for your application. So you can restrict access to users in specific roles for specific parts of the application. You can perform actions like redirects and rewrites. The routes are defined in an array, so even if you have only one, then you have an array with one route. It's evaluated in the order that the routes are in the array, and evaluation stops at the first match. So that's important to know. You should always have it in an array. It's evaluated in order, and evaluation stops at the first match. Now, this significantly overlaps with authentication and authorization. While you can put, for instance, allowed roles on a route, but for allowed roles to work, you would need somebody. To actually have a specific role, and they can only get a specific role if you have authorization and authentication in place. But that's something for a later point in time. So the app configuration part for routing actually holds a couple of fields that you can fill in. So first of all, we have route and the methods. So that's actually what matches the routes, right? So you can have /admin/star, which means anything that starts with /admin/ will match that route. And then you could say, I'm just going to omit the methods either way. And whenever somebody needs to go or wants to go in /admin, they need to be authenticated, or they need to be an administrator. You will add an allowed roles element on that and say, hey, if somebody wants to go to this route, they need to be authenticated, or they need to be an administrator, or whatever roles you determine. Now, next to that, you can have rewrite, redirect, and the status code and headers, which are processed after the match and after authorization, if need be. So a rewrite will change the request that comes in, and redirect, status code, and headers will change the response that goes out. Now, next to that, we have allowed roles, and allowed roles authorizes after a rule is matched. And allowed roles is actually an element that you can put on a route where you say, hey, this route needs to be, like I just said, for administrators only, or for authenticated people only. The routes, by the way, do allow wildcards at the end of route paths. So you can do /admin*, which means everything that starts with admin then matches that specific route. Next up are global headers. And based on global headers, you can set HTTP headers applied to each response because they're global, unless they are explicitly overridden by a route that's on a header, a route header that's on a rule. So you can determine headers on routes with the rules that we just saw. But if you want to have generic things like content security policies, you might want to have that as global headers available and run it from there. So if you want to explicitly remove a header, then you should set it, but set it to an empty string, which means we're going to remove it. And global headers can be used for things like caching, encoding settings, course configuration, and all that kind of stuff. Configuration also gives us the possibility of doing response overrides, which means you can define custom response instead of error codes. Now, for instance, if you want to have a 404, you don't want to have that Azure Static Web App 404 page that we just saw, right? That's also Azure branded and Microsoft branded, and it's fairly simple, so to speak. We might want to have our own styled 404 because there's a lot of awesome 404s out there that you might want to reincorporate into your solution. And then looking at useful things for response overrides, how about you want to have somebody be authenticated, so logged in a certain location, but if I go to that location and they aren't authorized, they will get a 401, sorry, which is unauthorized. How about we override that response and ask someone to log in if they get the unauthorized response, which means they're not logged in. So that's a way of us helping our end users find their navigation throughout the application. But the best thing is, this is all configuration and it doesn't need any code and it will just work fine. And I'll show that in a little bit. Now, you can also set the platform, which means we have a few things available out there. So you can have .NET, you can have Node, you can have Python. You can explicitly set those. I would almost say, of course, if you want to be explicit about the version of .NET that you're using for your function app, you do that in the CS proj of your Azure Functions. You don't set that on the Azure Static Web App. You can explicitly set that if you want to for instance, the type of Azure Functions that you're hosting, but normally determining and defining all of that inside of your CS proj should be fine. Last but not least for now is networking. And networking actually controls the network configuration of your static web app, which means if you want to restrict access to a specific amount of IPs that are allow listed, then you allow list that those IP addresses or those IP address blocks in the allowed IP ranges, which will also automatically block it for anything that's not in the allowed IP ranges blocks. So you can really tie down the application to it, for instance, only being accessible for people when they are in your office or have a VPN into your office and use the internet connection from there to connect to your static web app. There's a couple of miscellaneous things as well, like the forwarding gateway and trailing slashes. These are relatively short and simple. So forwarding gateway allows you to either set up how a CDN in front of your application would be accepted, and which forwarding headers, for instance, you want to accept. And trailing slash actually says, so what do you want to do with trailing slashes on your URLs? So you can set that to either be always, so that each and every URL always has a trailing slash at the end. You can set it to never, so that it never has one. Or you can set it to auto, where if you have an area, for instance, like /admin, and then you have change pages, upload files, whatever, then the admin has the slash and all of the pages underneath don't have it, but that's something that then the platform will decide for you when or when not to add those trailing slashes. Now, I've been talking for way too much without having any code on screen, so let's go there real quick. Going back to that function app that we had, to that application that we had right here in Visual Studio Code. Again, this is an Angular front end. We have a functions backend as well. And one of the things that we've implemented is a get data function. Now, let me switch this over to, I think it's config 001 real quick, where we can actually collapse this and make it a little bit easier to look at. There we go. that's just, I can get away with this. So what I've actually done here is implement an Azure function that for now just always returns the same entries, right? And it does that by having the entries here real statically and returning them from there. Normally I would do something like table storage or something else. I didn't have enough time to prepare for today's session, so that's why I have it like this. But for now, this works, right? And then if I want to see how this application behaves, then now let's dive back into that configuration that we had on the pull requests. And I've seen some remarks about CSS, because we always want to have CSS, right, when we do stuff like this. So of course there's always CSS. So real quick, we have a pull request right here that's opened up, and like I think it was Stacy who said, it's going to the pipeline is going to automatically inject the location where to find your result of your pull request. As you can see right here, your stage site is ready, visit it here, and as some of you might notice, this time there's a 2, so that means that this must be pull request 2. What actually this looks like now is somebody thought that this was a good idea, right? And they even said made it more prettier. This is like quite horrible. And that was that default 404. But as far as styling go, this is quite horrible. So one of the things that's really powerful there as well, they did not make it more prettier. We're going to close this pull request, and we're not going to do anything about this. We're going to leave it for now, which means when it updates, and it will do so in a minute or two, it will automatically remove this preview because the pull request has been closed, and then it says, okay, that then you don't need that preview environment anymore. Going back to the configuration that we were looking at, because that's what I was actually doing. Let me get back to, actually, let me go learn.microsoft.com, and then let's do this one. This is actually an overview of what you can do in Azure Static Web App with configuration. And there we go. There's an example configuration right here that, for instance, says, let's have a route with profile star, and then the allowed roles is only for authenticated users. Or the route admin index is only allowed for the administrator. Or this route images has a cache control header with a max age and a must revalidate. Now, we've actually implemented that here as well, because this, did I? I'm not entirely sure if I did. I did know I secured the app. Let's see if I did that. Let's go to configuration 1 and see what happens if I go here, and I'll do the get data. We will now see that my application is up and running. We get all 7 items back. Now let's try and get this one thing out the way. We want to have environment variables. Because next to, okay, I need to take a step back. What I'm looking now at is actually the application settings, so environment variables, which works for the backend, right? We're currently looking at the front end still. So what we have in that demo, in that second pull request, close this one down, go to that second pull request. Oh, this is still -1. So I need to find environments again and go to config 002. What I actually wanted to show you there, no, I want to return to a portal because I clicked the link for the actual branch and not for the for hosting the application, where it was going. That's where I wanted to go. Yes, continue. So this is where my application currently is. And then what's really powerful about configuration in please give me my branches. There we go. Config 2. Front end under source. There we go. So what I added now to make configuration a little bit more visible is I have now added a route /login that automatically redirects to .auth/login/AAD. So that means I'm going to use the power of Azure Active Directory authentication, and in my case, a Microsoft account, to be able to have people log in. And then I have a route star that says people need to be authenticated, which will automatically ask for the authenticated role if somebody goes into the application. Now, if I leave it with the top 2 lines or these 2 lines, I will get a problem, because then as soon as I host the application, I'll just get a 401 unauthorized. So like we discussed earlier, I would like to add a response override for a 401 and make sure that it redirects to /login, and then we'll get status code 200. And just to show you that this is the only thing that's been happening on this branch, let's find the repository right here. I'll just type it because this is going to take longer than when I do ASWA demo. I'll go into those pull requests and I'll take pull request 2. Come on, buddy. You can do it. There we go. We secured the app. Just so you see, files changed is only 1. And the only thing that has changed is we have the navigation fallback, we have the route with the login, and we have the route that now has an allowed role of authenticated, and the response override. No code whatsoever anywhere else has been changed except for what we've done here. Now, as soon as we go to the application, yep, there we go. And we'll take number, I think that should be 3, right? And I want to log in, it automatically forwards me to a login page because I want to log in user Azure Active Directory. And what it says now is when you grant consent to this application, it will have access to your email address and your username. So it actually has a consent question as well. And all of this is built in for you. You don't have to do anything except for configure. So when I do now grant consent, I will be an authenticated user. And in this same configuration, I will now be able to get the data. I will now be able to go to the About page and go home. All of this because I'm now authenticated with the platform. It's even cooler if you think that you can do /auth/me, not even depending on the provider you have, and see the information that was given to the application for you. So based on the fact that I'm now logged in, I have the role authenticated, and I also still have the anonymous role. And it gives me the email address and my user ID so that I would, for instance, be able to use this in my front end to display to my end users, hey, you're logged in using this email address. This actually works for GitHub and Azure Active Directory. Unfortunately, X has been changed, so support isn't entirely correct anymore. They're working on it. And last but not least, if you go into a hosted environment, so a paid environment, you can actually set up your own custom login. And in that case, you can do Apple, you can do Facebook, you can do LinkedIn, you can do anything that actually supports OpenID Connect. So that's pretty powerful as far as the application goes. In the interest of time, let me dive right in real quick and tell you that we also have app settings that might be very interesting to look at. App settings are actually what you would have for an app service or a function app as well. So the way we have actually implemented this, or at least tried to implement to give you a general idea on how this works. Let me share this real quick. is I went into the function app, and maybe you've already seen that a little bit while I was browsing the get data function. And if I do this on the correct branch, this should show that we now have a configuration that get values number of entries, and it defaults to 7. But this actually means that if number of entries now is configured for my application to have a look at, it's going to take that in. Now, what we just saw was on our application on number 1, right? So going back to, please go there. This is okay. This is number 1, if I'm not mistaken. So if we now go to the get data, we will still see those 7. Oh yeah, this was the broken one. This is fun. There we go. These are the 7 elements that I get. And now without changing everything or anything on my application code part, I can go environment variables. I can add an environment variable, in this case, number of entries. I can change that. So if my portal helps me, I will be able to add a number of entries and a 1, for instance, and click apply. Click apply. It's updating the app settings now, and as soon as it's updated, you can imagine what happens, because now if we go to the application, go home and click get data, it might take a little bit of time before it actually changes, because the functions in the backend need to be redirected. But in the end, it will automatically pick up that new configuration element and only return 1 line here instead of the 7 I have, all based on configuration instead of something else. There's a ton of things more I would like to show. Unfortunately, we don't have that time anymore. So one thing I will show you is the URL and or QR code that I said I would show with you earlier. So on screen now is the URL is .com/ASWAD-RVDB, or you can scan this QR code, will actually lead you to the exact same URL. And that actually has links to all of the resources on Microsoft Learn about configuring your Azure Static Web App, but also some links to videos and other interesting stuff that goes around Azure Static Web Apps. And with that, I would like to open the floor to some questions, if there are any, after this way too long story.
There are a couple, actually.
There are questions. That was awesome. I just want to say again, by the way, just so that people understand, I asked Rick at, I believe it was about 3 p.m. on Monday afternoon if he would do this.
That's true.
So absolutely stunning. Thank you so much. And yeah, Eric, I'll let you take the questions away.
Yeah, sure. We have a question. Are distributed functions WASI functions that run on the CDN?
Nope. Those are actually deployed in the region closest to whatever CDN needs access to those functions. So for now, those are still running inside of the Azure region that's closest to the CDN endpoint.
Okay. And then we actually have a question from me because I posted a few. Can you send custom HTTP response codes such as 418 I'm a teapot? Or do you only have access to a few of them?
There's one thing that's really bothering me, and that's the fact that I didn't think of this building a static web app earlier. Why didn't I come up with this? No, so the response overrides are only the 4 that I showed on screen. I think as far as the responses that you do based on, hey, this matches this, and then I give you a new response back, I think you're free to do whatever you want there. So presumably you can do a 418, but that's something I will be finding out somewhere today or tomorrow. Thanks for that one.
Remains to be tested.
By the way, one of the things that I actually didn't show, which is I think really important, but I won't make it long. One thing that I do think is important for people to know is that the routes under. I'm clicking the screen on online. That doesn't work for it working locally, right? So one of the things that's very important, if you look at config and you have a route, here you can actually also, I think we specified that, but you can also have the methods here, which means you could go to such an extent that you say, hey, anything under /admins or /API/admin is free to go for anybody if we are doing GET requests. But the puts and the posts and the deletes, I want to have only available for authenticated users. So you can make a change there on method level even. And then the nice thing is, since the API is hosted under the same domain as your entire application, this integrated security also applies to everything that's going on inside of the API. So it also opens up authentication and authorization on top of your APIs as well.
That one is really cool.
Okay, I
We
just
can
have one more
do verb
question
checks.
to this, if I can.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Are there any limits to the amount of routes that you can set up in this config file?
Yes. And I'm thinking what the maximum amount was. Was that 200? Not entirely sure. That's actually a good question. So normally that would be something that you static web apps. So that's something that I now immediately want to know, right? So
I apologize.
there we go. No, that's called nerd sniping, right? You give somebody just enough information for them to be able to have a look. Each
If
property
it's
specified
200, that
pattern.
number has been chosen by a manager of some kind because it's not a power of 2.
It's probably somebody said 200 should be enough for everybody.
Yeah, but a program had set to 256.
Yeah, probably. Let's
Uh-huh.
see.
640K, nobody will ever need more.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. This is the thing. There's only 2 restrictions for the static web app.config.json file. One is maximum of 50 distinct roles. Okay, fair enough. And the max file size of 20 kilobytes.
Okay.
Awesome. So another one from me. Can I say so the application is only accessible from other Azure resources? Basically an allow list with internal IPs of Azure.
The internal IPs of Azure, I'm not sure, since that would also mean this needs to be inside of a VNet.
Yeah.
And I think that's only available on standard. What you can do, of course, is if you have, I don't know, an app service, you can get the list of explicitly connected IP addresses to app services running in the region that you're running your app service in, and put those on the allow list. Yes, that would be completely possible.
Yeah. A question from Scott. Is adding status code 200 necessary when redirecting from a 401 response? The response overrides.
Yeah, if you don't, the status code will remain 401. I'm not really sure what each and every browser will do with that, because since it's an error code that has something to do with authentication, it might be that your browser responds differently than you would like it to respond, because the fact that you're redirecting to a normal page that actually has something to show the end user, you also want to update the response code or the status code to be 200, because otherwise a browser might interpret that as a faulty request and presumably or potentially break.
Yeah.
I've tried it with Firefox, Chrome, Edge, and Brave. I haven't found any of them breaking actively when I don't specify the status code, but I don't know all the browsers, so I'm not really sure if there might be anything that still breaks.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have a question from Coding After Work. If you could choose any type of pastry in the whole world, what flavor of stroop would you choose?
That's the stroopwafels, man. It's either bossenbollen or stroopwafels when you talk to Dutch people. No, a stroopwafel or a stroop.
Yeah.
Is two cookies actually with some caramel in between. Especially good if you just lay them on top of a cup of hot coffee to make it just that little
Oh yes,
warm and melty.
delicious.
Oh yes. So to give either Jimmy or Jessica or both of them an answer, I would go to a Dutch farmers market where they actually have people that build stroopwafels on site. They bake the cookies there. They have the stroop there warm in a pan, and they literally put it on the cookie, put it together, and hand it to you. Those are the best stroops you can get,
Hands
hands
down.
down. Yeah.
Absolutely hands down. So yes, so if you ever come
Wonderful
to a
question.
conference in the Netherlands, there are companies that bring these people to their trade stands. Highly recommend
Yes.
visiting those trade stands.
Oh yes, they're awesome.
Yeah. Okay. I think on that note, we have to stop for time. This has been absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks
And
for
if
coming.
anybody has more questions for Rick, you can get in contact. What's your Twitter handle these days, or your Blue
Rick
Sky
VD
handle?
Anything is Rick VD Bosch. So Blue Sky, Twitter, TikTok, anywhere. Rick VD
Awesome.
Bosch, you'll be pretty sure to find me.
Fantastic. Then thank you very much, and until the next time. Bye-bye.
Awesome, and have a great rest of the conference today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.